Hey, welcome back. I'm Mark Bremer, and in this continuing series on POSER 10 and POSER Pro 2014 by Renderosity, we'll look at different ways to approach handling skin tones. You've no doubt seen quite a few POSER renders where the characters look like, well, mannequins in a store. They're kind of fake and plasticky, and in the 3D world, that's a phenomenon known as the uncanny valley, where you get things that look sort of real, but really not, and you can tell very easily they're not. So we will look at, in this movie, ways to enhance and approach handling the default, or I should say some of the stock types of textures you have with characters. Let me show you what I mean here. I'm going to come in a little bit. We have got Ben. He is a holdover from POSER 7, and so I'm using Ben Casual right here. What I want to do is talk about ways we can go ahead and manage or work with Ben and some of the skin tones, and specifically I'm going to come up to the head. Now everything that I will do here you can just go to the nth degree, and by that I mean there's lots of finessing that can be done, and I'm not going to sit here and bore you to tears by going through all the little types of things that take place in creating robust characters for certain lighting. We're going to jump into one specific area, and when I show you how it's done you're going to start going, holy cow, there's a lot of ways to use this. And well, that's why we do what we do. So here is Ben. Let me zoom in just a little bit and rotate around the scene just a little bit. And again, as always, this is a little more of an advanced tutorial. If you see me doing things that I don't explain, it's because, well, I covered it in one of the earlier movies that come along with this series. So check those out here on Renderosity as well. If I do a render right now of Ben, we will see, well, we've got Ben kind of well, his eyes aren't even glazed over, they're just open. And I'm not going to concentrate on eyes because in an earlier movie where we talked about adding reflective channels to do that, you can address this problem with having an environment and actually having reflection channels. Ben does not have any reflection built into his textures to fake luminous wet eyes, so he's got this kind of weird look, and I won't deal with that right now. Easy to fix. What I want to do is deal with the fact that we've got skin that is very opaque. There are some shortcuts inside of POSER to go ahead and add something called subsurface scattering, and we are going to engage that, but we're going to go one level beyond that, and you're going to have to get your hands dirty to do this type of stuff, but the results make it totally worthwhile. So great, we've got Ben, and he looks delightfully, well, gray. I want to add another light in the scene here, and the light's going to be behind him. I spend a lot of my professional life in photography studios working with photographers for assignments, and there are so many lighting tricks that go on that help render or reveal the objects you have, and I'll show you one right now. The light we've got, I've deleted all the others out of the scene, is this kind of, well, if I highlight it and we happen to come over to the materials room, it's a very boring gray light. It is kind of an ambient light that just fills in space. What I want to do is just give this a little bit of a blue color, and yeah, we'll start there, but then I'm going to tone it down just a little bit. Yeah, like that. We'll come back to the pose area right here, and we can see we get a nice kind of blue here. And what I want to do is get a really bright spotlight behind the character. This is called a rim light, or something that separates the characters from the background. Done quite a little bit in television and movies. Your homework today is to go watch TV and watch how they separate characters in the foreground from scenery behind them by having lights come from behind them and create this little halo effect behind their head. Really cool thing. Well, that's what we're going to do right here. So I'll come up to Object, let's create light, and let's create a spotlight. This has come into our scene. Let me back out just a little bit and rotate this around so we can see it. High up here in our scene. So, quit rotating. Let's stop this. There we go. What I want to do is have this shine at our character from the back character's left side and illuminate this part or side of the head here while we get this nice kind of blue fill going on. Now before I do that, with this light selected, let me come over here and choose light 4, and you know what, let's give this a meaningful name here like Spot. Nice to keep track of that. Let me come over here to our other one and rename this from light 1 to Blue Fill. Just help me at least keep track of everything that's going on. Okay, I'm going to come back to our light spotlight, And with that highlighted, I'm going to right click, and this gives me some options, and one of the great options is point at. This is a behavior that follows the light around the scene as you work with it, and you can make it very, very specific, or you can enter a margin of error in the lighting controls, which is fine. I'll click point at, and what I want to do is not have it point at Ben in general. I want it to point very specifically at his head. So we'll come over here to head. I'll just double click on that, and it's been activated. So now when I come over to the parameter dials and say, okay, let's move this in X space here a little bit. Transform, we don't want rotate, we want move. Let me highlight that so I get that. Okay, translate. I'm going to move this and get it on the other side of our character, and you see the light now is just pointing at the character. What a time saver this is. I'm going to go ahead and bring this down here a little bit, and as I rotate around my scene, maybe okay, let me move it back in space a little bit, and we'll take the intensity of this, and well, we've got angle in set at 70, that is fine. Distance in, let's go ahead and have it at something like 50 feet. What this does is gives a very, very bright light up close here, and what I'll want to do is actually increase the intensity of this a little bit. Intensity is at 100%, let's go to 200%. Oh, let's go even more than that. Let's go to 300. When I talk about a rim light, you can kind of see what's going on right now around the character. And this is something that many, many Renderosity artists that are new to working with POSER do not do, and that is to separate the characters in the foreground from the background. There's plenty of times you don't want to do that, especially if you're trying to hide a character, but it really helps viewers separate certain objects, especially if the colors and the values are common. So this is just a fantastic little trick to go ahead and get this to happen. Let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit to our character. Now what we're going to deal with is some subsurface scattering. Let's go ahead and render up our character right now and see what we're working with. These are kind of the default stock render settings. You can tell right here that we have some stuff that screams at you as a viewer that this is a total CG production. The biggest is that as the light is hitting the character, there are super dark shadows on the character's ear here. We know that doesn't happen. We know that as light comes from behind ears, they're fine, they're thin, they are filled with blood, they kind of self-illuminate, and that is a process called subsurface scattering. So what I'll do is come over here to the material room. Our light is selected right now, blue fill. Let's come back to body, and then let's choose head. Can I not see today? Let's come down to neck parts, head. Alright, and that's not changing here. Let's come over here to Ben, head. There we go. Let me expand that, and now we get our character's head in place. Let me render one more time, and I had to shrink up the interface here so that we can see what's going on. Let me see if I can pull this over a little bit. There's the window that I wanted, and I may have to, holy cow, float this thing. Let's float it so you can see what goes on with our render right here. When, oh, and I docked it back. Brilliant, brilliant. Let's try that again. Please, please. Okay, let me shrink this up. The joy of working in a narrow space. Okay. Now we've got our render, which we had done before. If we come over here, let's scroll this a little bit or re-render it and have it fit in the area. And we get our dark shadows around the ear here, and we get the face. Now the reason I just did this is when we engage subsurface scattering for the head, we'll see exactly where the neck or the head stops as far as POSER is concerned, and the body picks up. So let's go ahead and do that. We have Ben, head selected. I don't need to work with the parameter dials. We will come over here and use one of the macros, which is a nice little script that runs just by clicking a button, add skin subsurface scattering. And let's rearrange the parts so it makes a little bit of sense here, and we can see what's going on. The image map itself of the head is separate from the rest of the body, and the reason that most poser characters are done this way is so that you can have a high level of detail on the head and a lesser degree of detail in the body, keeping file sizes small. With the subsurface scattering node that goes on, it grabs the face, it plugs it into the color, and then it does a little special math and plugs it in over here to alternate diffuse. What this is allowing is light to kind of fake its way through the object, letting you know that, oh, there's a little luminosity, it's not solid. So watch what happens when I render this, and let me, I can't make that any smaller here. Let's float this, please. And I can't get it. Can I get rid of the parameter dials here? Maybe. Let's go ahead and go floating, and I will move this off the screen so we've got a bigger area to work with here. We'll like that in just a second. Okay, let's render now that I've given you some space to see it. You'll notice that the head rendered at least the subsurface part before what was going on underneath it. And let me shrink this up here. Oh, that's exactly what I didn't want to have happen. I love it when things work like this. It docked this stuff over here. Thanks for helping. I love it when programs do that. Okay, let's come back down here. There. And it docked it again. Please tell me I'm not the only one that has issues like this. Okay, so we've got this. I want, and it docked it back in there. Man, I can't win with this today. And as long as that's docked, it won't let me expand that. I'm so used to working with POSER in a very large format that I don't encounter these issues too often, and I think it's going to do it again. Thank you. So let's float this and get this to stop doing that. I hope you're getting a good laugh out of this, right? Okay, here is our character. Here is the preview. Now, see where the line for the neck is right here? We'll re-render this here now that we can see everything. And look at the difference that subsurface scattering will get. We see the head render up because it goes through a different additional process for that. And then we see where it hits the rest of the body right here, and we get an immediate change. The light down here terminates abruptly. Don't really see much going on right here, but we've got this level of sheen going on. And we can see that, in fact, right on the very edges of the ear, we're getting just a little greater bit of light transmission through that. Let me go ahead and come back to our preview window, and let's zoom into this so we can see what's going on. And we'll render one more time right here. Goes through its multi-step process, and now we can see we're getting some cool type of light that's going on. Now here is where POSER is great, and here's where there is a little bit more to be desired in the program. We can see that right now, and again, this is a POSER 7 character. There have been some nice advancements since then, but everybody has access to these things, so let's learn how to use them better. The skin right here looks plasticky. Just yuck. What can you say? What I want to do, and it docked again, just don't even do that. If I get close, it auto docks. Neat. Okay, well, we'll leave it there a little bit. Maybe we won't, and I'll just pop it out later on. Yeah, I'll have to do that. Sorry about that. Okay, we've got the head going in. I want to call your attention to the texture map right here, and I'm going to jump into, let's go to Photoshop real quick. I have opened up this texture, and let me zoom in a little bit. The textures that come, even with POSER 7, are pretty good. This is 100%. Certainly they can go up to 4K or 4,000 pixel textures, which this is not. Anytime you work with textures, and we will be here, you want to work on a copy. Let me say that again. Work on a copy so you don't destroy your original one. I have saved this as a Photoshop file. However, what you will see me doing, you can do with other paint programs that are out there as well. I'll describe how I've done it in Photoshop and then tell you some other ways that you might be able to achieve this with some different programs as well. The first thing I want to talk about is that we've got a reasonably nice level of detail here. Don't know if through the video you can see it, but there is differences in the skin right here. This is done via kind of stitched together photographs of a real human. And so what I'd like to do is capture some of this detail back in POSER. So here we are with POSER, and the first thing I'll do is just grab this node and we will plug this into the bump channel down here. And there's a very, very low value right now that's coming in there, and I'm going to increase this to like 0.1. Now we're not going to see any difference here. If I collapse this, we can see this kind of weird, well, uber shiny type of thing. It looks metallic, in fact. If we go ahead and let me pop this out of here and do a render, let's look at the difference that takes place now merely by adding the bump. Safe to say, that bump's a little too aggressive. All right, that lets me know that. I'll pull this down here. That the bumps I have in here, well, they're too much. Let's go back to maybe what it did have in there. We plug this in here, 0.1. Let's come back to 0.02 and render this up and see if that, oh, thank you, thank you. This will be my bane for this entire version right here. Oh, I didn't ask you to do that. Don't get it so close. Okay. Well, let's try this again. You can see how the bumps were affecting the subsurface scattering. And wow, that's still too much, right? But the bumps are also adding to the way or where the subsurface scattering takes place. So let me dial this down just again a little bit again. And here's the thing. You see me kind of going through, and I don't want to say, well, just doing all this trial and error type of stuff. The amount of change and bump you put in really changes from character to character depending on how significant the bump maps are. And it docked. I didn't even have you close over there. Let's render this and see if we're back in the neighborhood of doing something reasonable right here. Okay, we're starting to get some nice texture to the skin tone. It doesn't look quite so plastic-like, and that's all right. Enjoy that. But we can tell, especially for the brightness of the light back behind, we still don't have what we would want to see here or expect to see here with a really thin material. The way POSER is executing the subsurface scattering is really nice for things like fingers, for maybe you know, thicker parts like noses, but it does fall down a little bit right here. When we look at some of the options we have to control that, well, let's look at some of the options we have to control. Texture detail, this is where you allow the texture to influence the subsurface scattering. Currently it's at 0.5. If we go ahead and bump this all the way up to 1 and render this, we'll see a subtle yet, oh, and now you did that. We'll see a subtle yet important change that takes place in the subsurface scattering itself. And this is starting to aggravate me. Thank you. Thank you again for that. Will you get tired of listening to me talk to myself like this? I'm the only person that listens. Okay. We have this displayed right here, and we're getting additional little bits of subsurface scattering that takes place right here because the roughness of the surface is being interpreted is allowing the program to go ahead and create a little more light bleeding inside of the object. Okay, well, great. So we've added bump to this, and we like that. Next step then, this is where you have to get your hands dirty a little bit. And something that I do for digital characters I have like this, I work with POSER characters in POSER. I work with POSER and other characters created by different vendors in other programs, and also in other 3D programs like Cinema 4D. There's some plugins to work with POSER characters right in that program. It's just really nice. Okay, what I want to do is start changing the textures we have to work with. This is the stock texture. It has been plugged into the subsurface scattering channel right here, but I need to create a different level of luminosity to the ear right here. The only way that I can do that is by actually bringing in another texture. Let's come back and visit our texture right here, and I'll get it to fit all within the window here. I have a couple layers going on. This is the, or I should say the background, if you look down on the lower right, is the same texture that POSER is using. what I have done is modified it right around the ears. And you could do this also if you wanted to right around the nostrils. Now, let me stop right here and say this modification that we're going to be doing to the textures and the subsurface scattering is not something you would want to use all the time with your character, irregardless of lighting. This is really specific towards having backlighting. With all CG, since it's all fake and doesn't actually obey the real world, there are times that you need to make modifications and adjustments specifically for a scene by scene or nature of lighting within a character, and that's what we're doing here. Strong backlight, rim light going on to make ears look a little more believable. So I brought in some levels here. The other way you could do this in other painting programs is just have another layer and paint this brighter red over it. I, instead of painting with that color, just created a change in the levels right here. If I select that and we click this open, you can see I brought up the lower end of the spectrum really far, which is changing the color and gets me that red color. Okay, great. Above that, I happen to have a hue saturation, which takes a little bit of that saturation out and brightens it up. If I take off these masks or disable them for the moment, you can see that this is what the map looks like by itself. I want the same level of skin subsurface scattering on a majority of the face, the way POSER is already interacting with it. All I'm doing is changing the ears, and so I confined these effects to this area using a mask. But you can just as easily create a layer in whatever your painting program is and just paint specifically with a different color and give it a level of transparency, or use the hard light type of blends or overlays that are also available. So with this done, I've already exported this file out as a JPEG file, and I'm going to import this in as a new node here inside the material room. So we'll come to new node, 2D textures, image map, click our browse item right here, and we have got this highlighted. You can kind of see, yep, there it is, and click open. And OK. Alright, I brought in a new image map. Let's expand that, and we can see, yep, we've got these kind of scary red ears going on right here. Let me collapse that. I'll now disconnect this from the regular texture map and plug it into the new one. Everything else is the same right here. The specularity is really bright right here, and I may want to bring this down just a little bit. Let's go to something like 0.5 and see how that treats us. If I collapse this right here, we can get a better sense of what's going on as well right there. And then highlight size is currently at 0.3. Yeah, we'll mess with that in just a second if we need to. But with this done, let's go ahead and render up our scene and see how this has affected the way the ear renders. Now, can you see this extra redness that's coming in here? If we want to go ahead and increase that even more, then what we can do is create a brighter version of it over here in Photoshop. We can brighten this up a little bit further. This is why I use the hue and saturation channels, because it lets me independently control those effects. But back here in POSER, now we're starting to get some of this real nice type of real world red that's going on. If I want to change things a little bit further, I can go ahead and say, okay, I want maybe a little translucence type of behavior going on right here. And this could be a case, well, let's talk about it. There's two ways to handle that. There is a translucence area right here with color. And this is going to affect the head completely all the way around unless we plug it into a texture map. And this is where we might want to come back in here, create a duplicate texture map, and make this relatively dark for the entire character, except for where the ears are. If we come back into POSER here and I say, okay, I need a little translucence here, and let's pick the skin tone, cancel out of that. Let's try this again, translucence color, and we'll pick a kind of beige color right here, and then the value, let's make this relatively small, maybe 0.02. Close this up. We don't see a real change in the preview. Let's keep our eyes on the ear here as we go ahead and render this out now. We're getting a little more light coming through here. Still have a little bit of these unnatural darks here, but we can totally remedy that with translucence control and going in and creating another texture map that we would then import to the translucence color channel the same way we've taken this image map right here, plugged it into the bump. We've got this image map going into the subsurface skin node. This is how you start getting your hands dirty and working with the program in POSER to do things like this, where you get thinner skin. Again, perfect for backlighting with rim light. If we had regular lighting in a scene, the ears would actually look a little bit funny. They would be glowing a little bit red. And that's just the give and take as you work with the program itself right here. So very cool way to go ahead and start using the outstanding textures that come with POSER, plugging them into different channels so we start getting some believable types of irregularities to the skin, and then duplicating the textures and playing with them a little bit further, and then plugging them back in to get some real world type of translucence in areas such as the ears.